Here we are, ready for takeoff into history. Bye-bye Adelaide, hello Trieste. Can catch up with some old movies in flight, but I'll be glad to get to my destination. Years since I last saw my birthplace. Well, not really my birthplace. That was Ljubljana in Yugoslavia, now Slovenia. But Trieste is where I was brought up, where the Lorenzons came from. I was born in Ljubljana in 1947 only because of the difficult and constantly changing political situation at the time, just after World War II. There were a lot of disturbances in 1954 when there was a strongly manipulated movement to get the Allies to leave and have the Italian government take over. We emigrated in 1955 on the ship Flaminia for some peace and more certain prospects. It's interesting to know that between 1947 and 2004, 350,000 people emigrated from this region, mostly soon after World War II. Just in Trieste alone, between 1954 and 1961, 10% of the population emigrated, mostly to Australia. In 1910, Trieste population was 230,000. Now it is 202,000. But now it is one of the wealthiest regions in Italy, and the world's leading travel book publisher rated it as the most underrated travel destination in the world. And it is one of Europe's most scientifically and educationally advanced cities. It hosts organizations such as the International Center for Theoretical Physics, the Trieste Astronomical Observatory, the National Institute of Oceanography and Experimental Geophysics. Also, there is the International School for Advanced Studies, whose main fields are physics, neuroscience and mathematics, the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, the Electrosynchrotron Light Laboratory, the National Institute of Nuclear Physics, National Institute for the Physics of Matter, National Research Council Institute of Crystallography, Structure of Matter and the Experimental Thalassographic Institute, Marine Biology Laboratory at Auricina, International Institute for Human Rights Studies, International Center for Science and High Technology, the Third World Academy of Science. There's also the University of Trieste, with 27,000 undergraduate students and internationally rated as the second best university in Italy. Per population, that's a rate of people going to university 3 times the rate in Adelaide. Yeah, I'm a bit proud of this city. I last visited Trieste in 1976. Now, 2005, I'm seeing it again, but with my Australian wife, Heather. This is a visit to my parents' history and my heritage, and sharing it with my wife, who hasn't seen Trieste before. I wonder how much it's changed. I hope there's no snorers around me who have weak bladders. We're coming into Trieste by train from Düsseldorf. And there's the Trieste harbour. Under the Austrians, it was one of the biggest ports in the whole of Europe before the First World War, from where the whole Austro-Hungarian Empire traded with the world. By 1914, almost 6.25 million tons of cargo went through Trieste ports annually, and in less than 20 years it had changed from being more than half carried by sailing ships to 91% by steamships. To compare it with Adelaide now, Port Adelaide handles 15.25 million tons of cargo a year, exporting to Asia and so on, while the Port of Trieste now handles 56.5 million tons a year. And that's a lovely overview of the city. We get off at La Gare, Trieste's central railway station, opened 1857, about the same time as Adelaide Central Railway Station, and it's quite a beautiful building. The station handles 6 million passengers a year in a city with a population of only 202,000. But it is and has always been a portal to much of Central and Eastern Europe. We're on the way to a hotel carrying our suitcases, but guess what? We just passed by the best gelateria in Trieste, actually rated on the internet as possibly the best in Italy, Zampoli. Can't go past it. Heather and I go inside, park our bags, and enjoy some wonderful gelato. Great way to start our visit. We finally get to our hotel, check in, and as it's very early, do our morning meditation in our room, then go out to do some more exploring. About the first place I want to check out was where I went to school in grades 1 and 2. I remember being thrown out of my class for ridiculing someone who had eczema. That was a very teary, painful incident, not to be forgotten. My standing there by the door with my school bag, about to be sent away forever from the class I had been with for 2 years. In Trieste, you went through the whole of primary school with the same class and teacher, crying until the teacher said that due to the compassion of the rest of the class, they were all very upset and some were crying, I would be forgiven and I could go back to my desk. Not sure whether that was way overkill in having a lesson taught. It really hurt. By the way, I'm the one standing at the teacher's left shoulder, just below the Alpha Lion picture. Then I check out the church where we went on Sundays. Rats, closed today. I used to think it looked very impressive inside. Now, somewhere here is number 7 Via Ghirlandaio. There it is. There are the green shutters I used to hang out of and watch the kids play in the streets. There was our bedroom, and Dad never allowed that window to be closed. He had to have fresh air. In winter, the glass of water beside the bed used to freeze, but we always had fresh air. And here's the courtyard of Uncle Doro's garage workshop that was under our block of apartments where I once tried to kick a soccer ball, wearing only light sandals, missed, and tore off the bottom part of my big toe on the concrete. Rushed upstairs, blood dripping everywhere, and banged on the door. Mum came out trying to shush me because Grandma was sleeping, then saw the toe and just whisked me in to fix me up. There is the piazza, where shopping stalls appeared every weekend. It feels nice being back here. Phoned Mum from Uncle Doro's old yard, and she was so surprised I was calling from where we used to live. She exclaimed, "Where are you? What are you doing there? That is my house." She was really stunned we could make contact over such a great distance in space and time. If I remember rightly, also not far from here were the barracks where the British Element Trieste Force, Bet4, was situated, at the Rossetti Barracks. In my days, it would have been either the 1st Suffolk Regiment or the 1st Loyal Regiment that were based there. I remember one winter day having a walk with my mother and passing by the guard at the gate. For fun I made snowballs. I would have been probably 5 years old, and threw them at the guard, who laughed and deflected the snowballs with his hand. Mum was laughing too, until a regimental sergeant marched up and started talking seriously to the guard, who immediately jumped to attention. We made ourselves scarce very quickly. I hope the guard didn't get into any trouble. He was fun. Just had a white borer blowing. It knocked some parked motorbikes over. The borer is a very powerful sudden wind that blows off the Alps, but in summer is called a white borer. The winter one, stronger and with sub-zero temperatures, is called the black borer. It has recorded over 185 km/h winds. When it blows, it blows. In winter, they put metal stakes in the footpaths and rope them up so people can grab the ropes when the borer suddenly blows. All the skies above Trieste are very clear now, all smog blown away. Not the bright sparkling clear deep blue of Aussie skies, but blue and clear, very unusual for Europe. Heather and I took some strolls through this lovely old city. So little has changed since I was here last. In fact, most of the buildings are still here as they were in the early 1800s, and earlier. This is called l'Arco di Riccardo, Richard Arch, in the old part of the city called Città Vecchia. It is called that because supposedly King Richard the Lionheart rode through it on his return from the Third Crusade. In my school days, I always heard how Richard was imprisoned in Austria on his return. But I found out it actually all started in Trieste, then under Austrian rule. When he came into Trieste, it was in disguise, and so he left with the local Austrian lords looking for him and chasing him everywhere. Apparently there was quite a ding-dong just outside Trieste, where they found his party, in which several of his knights were killed and they captured. But Richard managed to escape until he was finally captured near Vienna. You think that's old? This gate was actually built by the Romans when they held the city. They conquered the region in 177 BC. Then called Tergeste. Julius Caesar actually was the first to record its name, Tergeste, which came from the Veneti when they conquered it from the Illyrians about 1000 BC. Tergeste means market. Trieste has been inhabited for around 4,000 years. Talking of Romans, this is a good site to visit. The old Roman amphitheatre. And now, just above Città Vecchia, we have arrived at the Cathedral San Giusto, which is built from two early Christian churches joined together, with those churches initially built on top of a Roman temple. The first church was built around 500 AD, then two bigger churches replaced it around 900 AD, and they were finally combined in 1300 AD. The carvings around the entrance come from old Roman tombs. The architecture is now a combination of Gothic and Romanesque, with a number of famous mosaics and paintings on the walls and many historic relics on display. This is a fresco of San Giusto, dated about 1350, after whom the cathedral and castle are named. Heather, however, found the inside of the church rather creepy and couldn't wait to get outside. Interestingly enough, much later on I found out that the whole line of the Carlist claimants to the Spanish throne, 9 of them in all, are buried inside the cathedral in one of the naves. Some of them died unexpectedly within a day of each other in the latter 1800s. Maybe she was right about how she felt about the place. And here next door we have the old Castel San Giusto. This is the entrance to the castle. The castle originally was a tower protecting the local village. Bigger fortifications were then built until the Lombards destroyed them. Later a castle was built by the Austrians, and during the Second World War it was the site of the Trieste anti-aircraft batteries. This is a coat of arms near the gate, covered by a big drawbridge, and a brazier to keep the guards warm on the cold nights. Now the castle is a museum. It covers the Roman period, the medieval period, and then the later Austrian period. These bronze statues are automatons. They actually moved and rang the bell. And now they're just for display. The dungeons were supposed to be very interesting, but as a kid I never went to have a look. The thought of them frightened me too much. Now they're closed to the public, so I'll never ever get to see them. Ever. Around the castle are the remnants of the original Roman forum. This was then the centre of city life, where magistrates sorted out public and civil arguments, laws, judged on complaints, and so on. It would also have been a marketplace, a school, and a meeting place for friends. Heather and I walked back to the city centre down the hill, going through Città Vecchia, literally Old City. It is a historic area. Only about 2,000 people actually live in it, but it has many historic churches, cafes, hotels. Here is the one in which James Joyce stayed for a while with his wife Nora Barnacle. The streets of Città Vecchia are narrow, winding, with colourful buildings. But when my son Matthew went on a visit to Trieste a few years ago and came across Città Vecchia, he thought it looked a bit gloomy, streets narrow, old, and was concerned it may be a place where muggers hang out, so he went elsewhere. So now we're more into the centre of Trieste, with lots of impressive old buildings from the Austrian-Hungarian Empire days of the 1800s. This one includes the Trieste Stock Exchange, or Borsa. Borsa means bag, which they carried over their shoulder when doing their stock deals. One thing, they seemed to like colour in those days. A lot of the stone buildings are painted. Another thing that struck me here was the liking for bronze statues in a realistic setting. You just walk along and lo, there's James Joyce walking by. And here's Italo Svevo, our most famous Italian writer from Trieste. Trieste has always had a great deal of intellectual activity. Several very famous Italian writers were based here, as were Stendhal, the French originator of modern realism in writing, Franz Kafka, and a great deal of scientific activity. For example, the Bathurst Cave Trieste, which has gone deeper into the Earth's oceans than any other vessel, was built here. But then Trieste was never a quiet little out-of-the-way place. It originally was Illyrian, then Etruscan, then Roman. In 476 AD, it became part of the Byzantine Roman Empire run from Constantinople. Between the 6th and 8th centuries, it was held by the Lombards, then taken over by the Frank Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne. This is a picture of Trieste, then called Trieste, in the late Middle Ages, with the saltworks showing up at the front. By the late 12th century, it had become a free commune, until the Venetian Republic took over until the mid-14th century. The Triestean dialect is very similar to the Venetian dialect. Trieste was very fortunate to escape being sacked by the Ottomans in the latter 14th century. They burnt towns only 5 kilometers from Trieste, but bypassed Trieste itself. The treaties with Austria, as a means to bring more peace and stability to Trieste, were made in the 14th century. But Trieste was too able to negotiate a large degree of autonomy. Here we have a map of Trieste in 1756. By the 17th and 18th centuries, Trieste had become an important port and trading centre in the Austrian Empire, hampered a little by an invasion by someone called Napoleon between 1787 and 1809, who invaded Trieste on 3 different occasions. He just couldn't keep away from the gnocchi and presnitz. Here's the port in 1885. Trieste is now still a very important centre for shipping, shipbuilding and finance. Heather and I are by the docks now, where the Trieste buildings look out to the Adriatic Sea. And here's more bronze statues. The statues are done very realistically and feel just part of the scene. So here we are at the Molo, the dock, from where the immigration ships sailed. Now they cater for cruise ships. But the sea and Trieste are very old friends. Sailing here is almost a way of life. Finally, we get to the Canale Grande, the Grand Canal. Long ago, it was a fishing place that was where a river running through Trieste met the Adriatic Sea. Now what's left of the river runs underground and just comes up as a relatively short canal. When I was a kid it was full of wooden fishing boats, mainly rowboats. Now it's just full of pleasure craft. So has the local economy shifted. It's interesting to compare it with photos of about 1892. There were so many fishing boats under sail there then, but Trieste goes on. Note how apart from the boats, nothing else has changed. Here's a photo at the Grand Canal, showing St. Anthony's Catholic Church at the end of the canal, and on the right, with two domes, the Serbian Orthodox Church. And here's a current similar picture with the same buildings, just no fishing boats. So much of Trieste is like that. A real piece of time frozen, but somehow living and moving on without leaving its heritage behind. One of the buildings I particularly love along the canal was the Palazzo Kopčević, built in 1850 and influenced by the style of the Venetian ducal palace. The goldy-coloured tiles on the walls of the buildings just glow and glimmer when the light of the setting sun catches them. At that time of the day, the buildings look especially magnificent. Trieste was always an open, free city. It was officially titled a free port under the Austrians, so there were so many cultures mixed here. This is the local synagogue, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, established 1778, the Greek Orthodox Church, as distinct from the Serbian Orthodox Church, and so on. As for Catholic churches, you couldn't go around the corner without running into another one. But right here we have a most important part of Trieste, the Piazza Unità d'Italia, the Square of Unity of Italy. Named so to celebrate Italy's taking over of Trieste after the First World War in 1918. As you can see, it was still quite windy when we saw it. It was actually built during the Austro-Hungarian reign and is said to be the biggest square in Europe beside the sea. It was then called the Great Square, Piazza Grande, the name by which I always heard my father call it. He was born under the Austrian rule. It contains the Trieste municipal buildings and many historic buildings from the 1800s surrounded. All in all, that space has been a town centre for 700 years. The square looks especially nice when lit up at night. It was a place for many events. Demonstrations by the Yugoslav partisans when the Germans were pushed out of Trieste to try to get Trieste to become part of Yugoslavia. The American troops making a point that they were there, and these days, large concerts. But there's one place near here that has grabbed my imagination since I was a little kid, the Pescheria. That was the Trieste fish market. As a major port, seafood was a major part of the Triestine diet. And at the Pescheria you could buy just about anything that swam or crawled in the sea. It was huge, noisy, a bit fishy smelling. The fish were presented on marble benches. Here is the modern version, being built in the 1800s. And the fish were kept cool by constantly running fresh seawater over the benches, supplied by a huge storage tank inside the tower of the building. This is how it looked inside in my young days there. The building is used now both as an aquarium and as an art exhibition centre called Salone degli Incanti, meaning Salon of Enchantments. There's a great deal of open space inside it, so exhibitions can be shown in many creative and colourful ways. It is funny that a fish market made such an impression on me as a child. It's time to rest our feet and refresh ourselves. Off to Café Tomaseo, not far from here. Café Tomaseo is the oldest cafe in Trieste. It was established in 1830. It is rumoured that Carolina Bonaparte, Napoleon's younger sister, and the wife of General Joachim Murat, King of Naples and Marshal of France, secretly bought it. The venue was a favourite of bankers, artists, lawyers and intellectuals, including Stendhal, James Joyce, Italo Svevo, Franz Kafka, and other well-known Italian writers. This cafe was also a place where the Trieste movement to unite with Italy used to meet. Lovely inside, supposedly terrific coffee, I'll let Heather judge that. But also incredible hot chocolate. I tried one cup of this special hot chocolate and, no kidding, it was literally a cup of molten chocolate. Very tasty, but I found it a bit hard to drink, so rich, thick and sweet. One thing that surprised us was that it was here we found they have a policy of allowing pets into eateries in Trieste. People brought in their pet poodles, and even the dogs were served with their own bowls, while the owners enjoyed their cups of coffee and pastries. Triestini are good at celebrating and having fun. Every year there's a big Carnevale celebration in February, March, with the public, schools, clubs, organizations of all types involved. There are prizes for best fancy dress and street parades. When I went to school here, students would even come to school in fancy dress on the day. A very joyous and colourful time. You can't go past Trieste without acknowledging one of its most famous spots. That is Castel Miramare, which used to be the palace of Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian, the younger brother of the Austrian Emperor. It was built in 1860, when Maximilian moved in with his wife, Charlotte of Belgium. The style reflects the artistic interest of the Archduke, who was acquainted with the architectural style of the time, which is mainly eclectic, Gothic, medieval and Renaissance models. Local craftsman Franz Hoffmann and his son Julius were entrusted with the furnishing and decorations. The ground floor, destined for the use of Maximilian and his wife Charlotte, has an intimate family atmosphere, while the first floor was set aside for guests, who couldn't help being struck dumb by the sumptuous furnishings decorated with coats of arms and by the tapestry adorned with imperial symbols. He only lived there for 4 years before leaving for Mexico in 1867, where he became its emperor. However, during a civil war there, shortly after he arrived, he was shot and killed, and his wife returned to Europe suffering from insanity. This led to a belief of a curse that stated that whomsoever slept inside Castel Miramare would die violently. It is an item of interest that apart from the Archduke Ferdinand and his wife, in the 1930s the Duke of Aosta, a first cousin of the Italian king, lived there, then went to take charge of the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. He died in Africa a prisoner. During World War II, the German general Friedrich Rainer commanded Trieste and lived there, and was shot dead by the partisans. After the war, American General Bryant Moore, the then Allied commander of Trieste, used Castello Miramare as his headquarters and personal accommodation, and died in the Korea War. General Freyberg, New Zealand commander of Trieste at another time, chose to sleep in the garden in a tent during his command, and died in his own country at an elderly age. Another place I remember from my childhood in Trieste was Villa Revoltella. I remember going there for a visit and a day out. It was built by Pasquale Revoltella, an entrepreneur of Italian origin and son of a butcher. He built up a very successful business, insurance and shipping company, and developed excellent contacts in the Austrian court, eventually being made a baron by the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph. He left all his wealth, houses, artworks and books to the city of Trieste. His house in Trieste is now a museum, and Villa Revoltella, outside the city, is a place where people come to visit, have picnics, and generally enjoy the ambience and gardens. Well, it's now time to go back to Oz. A last look at Trieste, and we have to catch our plane ride. One more sleep in a plane, watch a movie, enjoy a flying meal, and we are back in good old Adelaide. I left some good memories behind, some beautiful places. But then, where else do you get this? This is our backyard, where I mostly grew up. Welcome home.